My name is Eunice Garcia.
And I'm her co host, Luis Avalos.
We are In the Time podcast. Today, we will be speaking about a court case that forever changed America, Marbury versus Madison.
The year is 1800. Thomas Jefferson is representing the Democratic Republican Party. His opponent, John Adams, is representing the well known Federalist Party.
Although they were serving as ambassadors in Great Britain and France, and therefore were not able to sign the Constitution with their colleagues, these two are considered prominent founding fathers of the Constitution. Despite their similar political careers, they would become bitter enemies in the year of 1800.
Thomas Jefferson defeats John Adams in the fourth presidential election by a mere 8 electoral votes. This event marks the first time in history where the executive branch experiences a shift in political powers. Who knew that the unity George Washington saw after would be gone within just one election?
Adams and the Federalist Party realized that Congress and the executive branch would now be dominated by the Democratic Republicans. In their eyes, those Democratic Republicans would ruin the new republic.
Prior to Jefferson's inauguration, instead of enacting a law that would be beneficial to everyone, Adams decided to express his anger by having Congress pass the Judiciary Act of 1801. This politically fueled act would appoint 60 new circuit judges and 42 new justices of the peace solely to frustrate Thomas Jefferson.
These judges are known as the infamous Midnight Judges. Just imagine Thomas Jefferson walking into the Oval Office and seeing hundreds of undelivered commissions. Jefferson made it clear that he would not support any Federalist judges in the court.
However, William Marbury had a different opinion on the matter. Marbury was appointed Chief Justice of the Peace, and he was furious that the Secretary of State, James Madison, had failed to deliver his commission. He petitioned that the Supreme Court would do something for this unjust act. Marbury asked for a mandamus, which would allow him to demand the Supreme Court to do something.
At the time, John Marshall was Chief Justice of the court. He declared that Madison's failure to deliver the commission was in fact illegal. Although this is true, Chief Justice John Marshall did not want to order the President and the Secretary of State to deliver the commission. Instead, the court proclaimed that the Judiciary Act of 1801, which allowed Marbury to bring his claim to the Supreme Court, was itself unconstitutional. John Marshall reasoned that the act went beyond their field operations according to the Constitution. It clearly states in Section 3, Article 2 of the Constitution that this is in fact forbidden.
Marshall concluded that the court could not issue the writ of mandamus because the Judiciary Act of 1789 conflicted with the Constitution. Before Marbury versus Madison, the court debated different issues, but they had never declared a law unconstitutional. In fact, the federal judiciary had so little power, Thomas Jefferson did not bother sending James Madison to the Supreme Court so that he could defend himself. Marbury versus Madison helped change these beliefs. Though this case, the court established that the federal judiciary can review acts of the executive branch.
They established that the federal judiciary can review and strike down the acts of Congress. There are two decisions that a president can make. The first kind are the ones that are left up to his discretion, but there are some executive actions that have to comply with the law. These are the decisions that the court can review and can be reviewed as an initial matter. John Marshall's decision established this. He allowed the court to exercise their power over executive actions without testing the executive's power, which they didn't have the power to do so at the time. This gave the court the potential to expand their power in the future.
Some may see the Marbury versus Madison case as a loss, but like a wise man once said, you have to lose the battle to win the war.
This was the Marbury versus Madison case in a nutshell. Now I will be sharing a few little known facts about the case that changed US government forever. Firstly, Marbury was actually fired from federal office. During the Adams administration, the United States Navy had expanded its fleet to 20 ships. In May of 1799, the fleet was still growing. As mentioned, Marbury was selected to spearhead development of the Washington Navy and oversee the construction of a Special 74 gunship. Unfortunately, the press reported that the gunship project was not faring well. Marbury, largely due to political matters beyond his control, was dealing with a persistently late timber supplier. The problem with the supplier significantly delayed and raised the cost of the project, which was running on a tight deadline. While the press revealed the scandal, newly inaugurated President Thomas Jefferson was focusing on other matters, such as Adams' last minute judicial appointments, which we just got done talking about. Jefferson had little patience for the timber scandal. He counseled construction of the warship, and shortly after, a cabinet member fired Marbury from his position as a naval agent. The second fact that I'd like to share with my listeners is that Marbury was announced in a hotel living room. Pursuant to a mandamus power given to the Supreme Court by the Judiciary Act of 1789, the court sat as a court of original jurisdiction in Marbury versus Madison. In December 1801, the case commenced proceedings with an order to show cause in Marbury's favor. Scholars believe that this initial order caused the newly Republican Congress to pass the Judiciary Act of 1802. Among other things, this act changed the Supreme Court calendar. No cases, including the rest of Marbury, would be heard until the first Monday in February 1803. On February 10, 1803, Marbury's attorneys argued the case. Neither Madison nor an attorney representing him was in court. Madison had never even acknowledged the order to show cause. We previously talked about how this was because nobody really thought the court would do anything. They didn't really have power at the time. But anyway, shortly after the argument, Justice Samuel Chase became quite ill. To accommodate him in the winter weather, the Supreme Court began to hear arguments where the justices' old lodge, Stale's Hotel. On February 24th, 1803, the justices gathered for 4 hours, while Chief Justice John Marshall read the landmark Marbury decision. The case that made the U.S. Supreme Court one of the most powerful courts in the world was announced in the living room of a three-story hotel. In the end, William Marbury's name made it into the history books, probably just not the way he had envisioned.
Before we leave, we'd like to give you guys a few questions to consider. The first being, if the Supreme Court of the United States had issued the writ of mandamus, how could it have forced Madison to comply with the order? What would have happened if he had ignored it? In other words, does the court have the power to enforce a certain law?
Secondly, in the court's opinion, is Marbury entitled to his appointment?
Thirdly, according to the decision, does the Supreme Court of the United States have the authority to issue a writ of mandamus to force Madison to deliver the commission? Explain the process. Is there any way to reverse the court's decision?
Our fourth question is, in this case, Chief Justice John Marshall and the court, quote, gave up some power in order to get more, end quote. Explain. What power did they give up? What power did they gain? Why did the court do this?
The fifth question is, why does the judicial branch, as opposed to the executive or legislative branch, have the power to judicial review? Why specifically does the judicial branch have the power to do this?
And lastly, imagine that Jefferson, rather than Adams, had appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Would the outcome of this case and the future of the country have been different? Why?
And with that, my name is Luis.
And my name's Eunice Garcia. This was In Our Time podcast, Marbury versus Madison edition, the case that changed history. We'd like to thank oides.org, Risa Golubov, and Landmark Cases for helping us craft this episode segment. After all, we're both big lovers of history. Next segment will be posted on Wednesday, 3 p.m. Central Time. See you then.